Hey, you probably don't know me, but I encountered you once when I was a werewolf. And I thought that you looked pretty cool, and I also think that we should hang out sometime. I didn't know any other way to get in contact with you. Began the biggest, reddest flag I have ever ignored in my entire life. It was a Facebook message I received when I was 20. I was in college, and yes, it was from a man who dressed up like a werewolf every full moon. My response was, of course, sure. Just sure, totally unflappable, sure. What would you suggest we do? And the werewolf boy said, well, I get Chinese food every Friday, but I try anything 3 times. When I asked you, I actually imagined that we'd go skeet shooting. And I said, I've never shot anything, but Chinese sounds good. So I went to get China. First of all, that was the only way he could think to contact me in college. Like, he could have just walked up to me while he was a werewolf instead of hiding in the bushes and then Facebook messaging me later about it. That's almost weirder. But I went to get Chinese with him, and we were in the Chinese restaurant, and I did find him very attractive. So when he said, do you want to see my tattoo? I was like, yes, Mama does. And he pulled up his shirt, and he had this like giant symbol, like this like loopy, like satanic, and he was like, do you know what this is? I was like, no. And he said, this is the sigil of Lucifer. It's what you use to summon Lucifer to this earthly realm. And I was like, I'm wet. And he was like crazy built. And I don't mean that he was like super muscly. I mean, he was built like a crazy person. Like a lot of like lean muscle, you know, like he's running a lot. Like a guy that you would run into in a library and you'd be like, maybe you'd murder me, but it'd still be hot. So he said, why don't we come back to my place? I can make you some clip-on fangs. And I was a smitten little kitten. So we had a lot of nights like that back at his place. You know, me with one of those dental fixtures, like if you've ever gotten braces, the same thing, the mouth mold with the clay, but instead of in the dentist chair, just in the middle of this college man's apartment, drooling into a bowl on a first date, which was great. His room was like, it was like the back room at like a haunted house. There were just prosthetics and Max, he had like a huge penchant for special effects, for horror effects. I did know one thing about him before I went on that date with him, which was that my friend had been doing a senior film for which he needed, for his thesis, he needed teeth that looked like little children's teeth. So he knew Werewolf Boy was the guy to go to, and he said, could you get me some children's teeth? And Werewolf Boy said, real or fake? And then saw him a few weeks later on campus and walked up to him and reached in his pocket and grabbed a bunch of teeth and just handed it to him and said, oh, I've been looking for you. Who knows how long he was carrying those teeth around. But it was interesting. It was a really interesting time in my life. And the thing is it was like grotesquely glorious. You know, I felt like I was living in a rom-com written by a really quirky serial killer, which is kind of my entire vibe. So it felt right at the time. The first time we ever made out, he immediately got a nosebleed, just like in an anime. Which was also insanely attractive to me. He would say things like, you know, I've hooked up with girls much hotter than you, but I like you because you kind of remind me of a cat. And I'd be like, oh, sick, sick, sick. Love it. I have always had this weird psychosexual fascination with the idea of the grotesque. And I'm talking about like grotesque in the philosophical sense, you know, a body exceeding its boundaries. This is where all these myths of like werewolves and vampires and zombies come from. It's because humans as a species, we hate the fact that we are not in fact whole and bounded beings. We are a series of guts and organs and bones and tissue that could topple like dominoes if the right one failed at the right time or wrong time. And there's always this idea of the grotesque that, like, if you can somehow transform, then you can look at mortality in a different light, that maybe you can escape mortality, you know? And in my case, it was sort of like, instead of being the girl that gets mauled in the woods, I could be the only one the wolf would never kill. But it never turns out like that. And there was one time my friends and I were over the Werewolf Boys' apartment pre-gaming and watching The Fourth Kind. As you do, post-Man concert pre-party. And so we were all having a good time, and the werewolf was just taking shots, doing push-ups. Taking shots, doing push-ups, to the point where, like, my friends were like, we have to go, like, study or fuck or buy weed. We just have to go. We gotta get out. We can't be here. So they left, and then the werewolf boy was taking shots, breaking a flower pot, taking shots, pinning me up against a wall. At which point I realized maybe he is a monster after all. And he said, do you think you're attractive? And I panicked, and I was like, I don't know. Because I don't, and because it was scary. And he said, he was telling me all this stuff, like, I used to take rats and get them from the pet store, and I'd take them home, and I'd torture them. I once shot a rat right in the eye. And I'm really bad at, sort of tenuous situations, so my response was, if you shot a rat in the eye, isn't that just its whole head? Like, this guy could, like, kill me, and I'm like, let's talk about the logistics of what you just said, sir. Rats have really small eyes. And he told me that he wasn't allowed to go on any more boar hunting expeditions with his family because his bloodlust was too strong. He was always saying things like his parents, like, invented chlorine or something. In addition to being a werewolf, he was a pathological liar. You tell me which is worse. But eventually, we got out of that, and I was a little freaked out, but we went to a party. And I still stayed the night, but I sort of inched as far away from him on one of those twin college dorm beds as you could possibly be, and just slept there stock still all night. And then in the morning, I got the fuck out of there, because he was a monster after all, but he was also a person. He was a person, and I was a person, and that morning he was a person that I was not gonna see anymore. And then weeks later, I finally got the clip-on fangs that he had made for me, but try as I might, they would not fit the teeth that they were molded for.